It's always fun to try new varieties of plants in our gardens, and last year was no exception for me. Today I'm going to talk about those new varieties and how they performed for me last year. So instead of a typical unboxing of the new varieties I'll be growing this year, consider this an unconventional seed haul. Maybe you'll find a variety or two you'll want to try yourself. What I'll be doing is jumping back and forth between a video I recorded last year on the new varieties I chose and why, and then I'll come back and give you my opinion after growing them this year. Let's get started. Let's start out with the greens because they're the first ones that are going in my garden. And the first one I have here is Ovation Greens Mix from Johnny's. I'm trying this because I loved their Elegance Greens mix last year, and I thought, let's just try a different mix because I really did like those. The only bad thing is that there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of these. I've already planted some, and there's not a lot in that envelope. Next, I have the Cheap Frills mix from Johnny's and the Premium Greens mix from Johnny's. I have larger envelopes, which makes it actually a lot cheaper to buy the larger ones. I should have bought a larger one of the other ones, but we'll be trying all of these and it'll be fun to compare. I absolutely loved the greens mixes that I tried this year. The Ovation Greens mix, the Cheap Frills mix, the Premium Greens mix, all of them I loved in my garden. Out of all of them, I would have to say that the Premium Greens mix was my favorite. It's got a mixture of red mustard, Mizuna, green mustard, Chinese cabbage, and tatsoi. What I liked the most about the Premium Greens mix was that it had this beautiful array of colors and textures. And what I found about the Chinese cabbage, I actually thought it was lettuce for the entire year because it looked like lettuce and it was crisp. I found that it was actually Chinese cabbage when I went back and looked at the seed catalog, which would explain why it's lasting in my winter longer than lettuce does. So that's one reason I really enjoyed the Premium Greens mix. But here's a tip for you if you're wanting to buy any of these greens mixes from Johnny's. They are not cheap, and if you buy one packet, that packet is not gonna last very long. I would recommend to bump up to the packet ahead of that first one. You get so many more seeds out of it and it doesn't cost that much more. For me, I'm still using the Premium Greens mix and the Cheap Frills mix, and I've been using them all year. I think I may even have enough for a second year, whereas the Ovations Greens mix, which I only got a small packet of, it only lasted maybe 1 or 2 plantings. So if you want a greens mix, I would highly recommend it, but I would recommend that you choose not the smallest packet, but the one up to get more bang for your buck. The next one is Muir, M-U-I-R. This is a lettuce that I have heard great things about in my local community, like in Arkansas, about how heat tolerant it is, and it's always listed in one of the most heat tolerant lettuce varieties. So I thought I would give it a try. The Muir lettuce absolutely lived up to its name. It was the most heat tolerant lettuce I grew in my garden. It was the last one to go bitter and to bolt in my late spring, and I've even been growing it as a fall and winter planting, and it's actually kept up with the cold pretty well. I would say Muir would definitely be a staple in my garden. I did enjoy how it tends to be more crisp than some of your other leaf lettuces. So if you're a fan of iceberg lettuce and maybe you're like me and you struggle with growing them because of your climate, then I would really recommend Muir. I think it's a fantastic option and it's definitely becoming a staple in my garden. Next, let's go to a new celery variety. This is from Johnny's called Kelvin, and this one is supposed to be better for heat and also just in general climate issues, a little bit more resilient. I love the Tango variety last year, and I'm pretty sure I got that one from Johnny's too, and I'll be comparing this side by side to the Tango. The Kelvin variety of celery turned out to be fantastic. I planted it alongside the Tango, and frankly, I couldn't really tell the difference. They both gave me fantastic harvests, and both of them, even after I harvested them pretty hard in maybe June, they continued to grow back and they gave me a fall harvest. I think planting them in a slightly shady area below okra Pinto was really the key because they didn't end up bolting or going to flower like in the past, so I think that was helpful. I was able to get 2 harvests, although the fall harvest was a little bit smaller, out of both the Tango and the Calvin variety of celery, which is a huge accomplishment for someone like me who's in the southern US where celery doesn't like the heat. So I would say this is a win, and it's definitely staying in my garden. Okay, still on cool weather crops here. I bought 2 new kinds of beets. This one is from Johnny's called Moneta, and this one is unique because it only produces 1 sprout per seed, which normally beets their polygerm. I can't remember what the name is. Anyway, 1 seed has several different seeds within it. So you have to do a lot more thinning. And this one is supposed to be better because it's a monogerm, which means it should have just 1 seed sprout per seed. Maybe it would make less work thinning. So I thought I'd try that. The Moneta beet absolutely performed for me. It was one of the best that I've ever had. I really liked the size, it sized up well, and the fact that it only had 1 sprout per seed, the fact that it was a monogerm as opposed to other varieties of beets, that was really helpful when it came to planting one and then not having to thin later on. I really liked the ease and convenience of that. And then the next one, Formanova beet. This one I bought because it has cylindrical roots, which would make it a lot easier to can. I tried the variety Cylindra, which is also supposed to do that, and it never did produce really big roots for me, and so it didn't really work well for canning. So I'm gonna try this Formanova and see if it does any better. The Formanova beet was another winner. I've always wanted to grow the cylindrical type beet because I can my beets, I pickle them, and to me, having a long slender beet would have been easier to be able to slice in order to can pickled beets, and I wasn't wrong. Sadly, the Cylindra hadn't worked very well in my garden in the past with the several times that I'd tried it, but the Formanova did. I was finally able to get these long beets that were perfect for slicing and canning, and they're definitely going in my garden this year. Still in cool season crops, I'm trying a new cabbage. This is from In My Gardener called Golden Acre. I ended up buying it from them because it was cheaper. You can find it at lots of different seed sources, but it's a shorter days to maturity, which is good for my summers. So we're just gonna see how it does. I'm gonna be testing it side by side to one of my other favorites, Farao, F-A-R-A-O. I hate when you can't pronounce seeds. Anyway, I love that variety. Let's see how this one stacks up. The Golden Acre cabbage performed very well, and it ended up doing what I expected it to do. I planted it right alongside my other favorite variety, Farao, and honestly, I couldn't tell the difference between the two. What I'll probably do in the future is plant the Golden Acre cabbage just because the seeds for Farao are really expensive. And so if I can get the same type of quality with the Golden Acre and it continue to perform well for me, it's one that I will continue to grow in my garden. And I'm also gonna try a new broccoli variety. This one's called Monty. This is from Johnny's, and it's supposed to be more tolerant to the heat. And I'm gonna compare it to the Green Magic and the Castle Dome. The Monty variety of broccoli did very well in my garden, but it was the first to start to separate, showing signs of going to flower earlier than the Green Magic and the Castle Dome. The timing was very slight though. It really didn't start doing that all that much sooner. I would say that the Monty is very similar to the Green Magic and the Castle Dome, but because the Monty did start to show signs of bolting just a little bit sooner, I'll probably stick with my tried and true. This is kind of a fun choice that I decided to make. It's a Chinese broccoli called Yad Fa. It's supposed to be, it says like a cross between asparagus and broccoli, only sweeter. Doesn't that sound good? I love asparagus and love broccoli and add some sweetness in it. It's supposed to grow like a broccoli plant, and all the parts are supposed to be really edible, the stalks, the leaves, all of that. So, and it's supposed to be quite a large plant. Thought it'd be fun to try. The Chinese broccoli was really fun to grow. It had the same type of growth habit that broccoli did in the beginning, but then it started growing really tall and it started producing these asparagus type shoots that probably could have been eaten as an asparagus substitute more than I did. I think the problem in the spring was that it was coming to harvest at the same time that my asparagus was, so I was just eating asparagus. And then in the fall, it wasn't as cold hardy as I would have liked it to be. So I think it was a really fun option to be able to grow a different type of broccoli, and it became a huge plant altogether, but I'm not sure that I'll grow it again in the future. It was a fun experiment, but for me and for my uses in the kitchen, I've just found I didn't use it as much as I do broccoli and asparagus. Let's move on to the warm season crops. I bought one new cantaloupe. This is from In My Gardener called Minnesota Midget. And this one is supposed to be very early, only has 3-foot vines and a 4-inch fruit. So 4-inch fruit's gonna be very small. That would make sense why it says midget. And so it's supposed to actually be good for containers. And I thought this would be fun to maybe grow early in the season before it gets really hot and maybe get an early crop of cantaloupe, because my other cantaloupes usually don't start coming until July. So maybe we can get an early crop. That'll be fun. The Minnesota Midget cantaloupe lived up to its name. It was an early variety. It was the first melon that I harvested. It was delicious. I love that it was a personal size, because a lot of times when I'm eating cantaloupe, since I'm the only one who eats it in the family, I don't like slicing all that up and then I have to hurry and eat it before it goes bad. I really like the small fruit size of the Minnesota Midget. The one thing I noticed about it though is that after it fruited just a couple of fruits, it didn't end up living. And I can't really remember why. By that point I was too busy with the rest of my garden, but I do remember that I didn't get any cantaloupe after that. So that may have been a fluke, or maybe it was just something about that variety or the cantaloupe in particular. But I definitely think that I want to grow it in the future, because even having that small fruit, even if it was 1 or 2 early in the season, and I didn't have to wait as long to get a fruit out of my garden, I thought that was a really good thing. This is a new cucumber I'm trying called China Jade. And it's supposed to be like a snacking cucumber, which means it'll be good for fresh use, which would be great for me in salads. All summer long, I'm usually having arugula and cucumber salads because that's all that will survive in our heat. But this sounded really good, and from the reviews online, a lot of people talked about how delicious it was. Another thing that I like about this one is it doesn't need pollination, which I found to be very helpful with cucumbers, especially early in the season when the bees are off doing their own thing with the weeds and all that other stuff, and they're not really interested in a couple of cucumber flowers. This would help it. The China Jade cucumber was incredible. It was delicious, just like everyone said, although I have a hard time sometimes distinguishing between flavors of cucumbers. To me, they kind of all taste similar as long as they're not bitter, but this cucumber was definitely very tasty. What I liked the most about it though was how prolific it was. Because it didn't need pollination, it was producing so many fruits throughout its life cycle. Toward the end of the season, it did start to die back. I'm not sure if it got a disease or what, but I did enjoy so many fruits off of these plants. I was able to give plenty to a local cafe for her to use them. I didn't end up pickling them. I don't know if I could have, because they're more of a slicing cucumber, so I didn't try. In the future, it might not be bad to use it with something like a relish, but I'm not sure how well it would hold up with the pickling process. But overall, I really enjoyed China Jade, and I can imagine I'll probably grow it again. The only thing that I would say is because it grows really large, it was a little cumbersome to have to store in the refrigerator. A lot of times it wouldn't fit in the crisper because it was so big. If you're wanting a whole lot of bulk of cucumbers, like my friend that has a cafe, that probably would work out really well. For the home gardener though, it might be better to switch to a variety that doesn't grow quite as big and is a little bit more manageable. But overall, I definitely enjoyed the China Jade. Next, we have watermelon. This is where I got a little bit crazy, and that is, I bought 4 new watermelon varieties to go along with the other ones that I still have that I really love. But I was a little more strategic about the watermelons this year. I decided to choose different days to maturity, because right now when I grow watermelons, they're all mature at the same time, usually late July into August. And I'm hoping to get a little bit more of a staggered maturity so I can have watermelons for longer, because it's my favorite plant. The earliest is supposed to be this new one called Early Girl, and you can tell it's a small one, which makes sense why it would be earlier, because it didn't have to develop as big of a fruit. And it also can be a candidate for pots, and each of the fruit are only 3 to 4 pounds. As I talked about in depth in a recent podcast on things that didn't go as planned this year, we'll link that in the description below. My watermelon plans kind of fell flat this year. It wasn't a great watermelon year for a variety of reasons, but I did find that selecting the different varieties for the different days to maturity worked out well. I did get my earliest watermelon in the Early Girl as planned. I really enjoyed that because it was a personal size watermelon and I was able just to eat it all in one sitting. It doesn't take up a lot of room in the refrigerator and it was good. I loved being able to have it early on in the season. And one thing about the Early Girl is that it didn't just produce early in the season, it also continued producing for the rest of the season. In fact, I had some that were still on the vine when the frost came. So I'd say that variety is definitely a winner. And then finally we have Moon and Stars. And this is a 95 days to maturity and it can get up to 40 pounds. I'm excited about this one. I've heard really good things about it. I've never grown it before. The Moon and Stars was definitely a disappointment. All the ones that ended up fruiting, they showed all the signs of ripeness. And then when I went to cut them, they were all unripe. And I don't know why. I think there were 2 or 3 like that. I was so hopeful because it was such a beautiful plant and I've heard such great things about it, but it just didn't work out well for me. But it's really hard to be able to judge watermelons based on this season just because this season was not a good watermelon year for me. So I may try some of these in the future just to give them another go. Okay, next we've got tomatoes. This year's tomato year was fantastic. It was the absolute best tomato year I've ever had. And if you're interested in hearing more about why I think it was so great, I did a whole podcast episode on how I think that I ended up having a fantastic tomato year this year. But for the new varieties, I felt like overall they performed really well. Okay, so first we've got Pomodoro Squisito. This is from Territorial Seed Company. I bought it because it is a San Marzano type, but it's supposed to be blossom end rot resistant. And that is the biggest complaint I've had about San Marzanos is they have blossom end rot a lot. With the ones I grow, especially the ones that grow in straw bales, probably because of the water thing. So I thought if these are more resistant, maybe they'll be better. The Pomodoro Squisito absolutely lived up to its name. It was a San Marzano type with blossom end rot resistance. I definitely found that those did not have blossom end rot near at the rate as my San Marzanos that I had planted in my garden also. This might be one I actually move to as opposed to San Marzano and completely do Pomodoro Squisito just because I found that it to be such a productive tomato and having that resistance to blossom end rot is a huge plus for me. The next one here is a tomato called Lilla and Latah. This was sent to me by Wood Prairie Family Farm. They have organic seeds. So if you're interested in organic seeds, they're a great seed source. But from what I read online, it's kind of a smaller tomato, and not only with the fruit, but also with the plant. So I think I'm gonna try these in my green stalk this year and see if they do any better in the green stalk compared to the Romas that I did last year, which they were like, okay, maybe these will do better since they're smaller plants. The Lilla ended up doing well in my green stalk. It's a tomato that if you're wanting something that you need to grow in a small space and you like the smaller tomato fruits themselves, I think it would be a great option. We don't typically eat those types of tomatoes all that much, and they're not all that convenient for canning. It's not like I had enough to can, so I'm not sure that I'll grow that one again in the future, but for a small space gardener, it's definitely a viable option. The next one I have is pineapple, and this is one I bought solely because it's Joe Lample's favorite tasting tomato. He talked about how amazing it tastes. Why I decided to do that when I don't like the taste of tomatoes, it really didn't make a lot of sense, but I do like tomatoes fresh in salsa and bruschetta, and so maybe this will blow me away, who knows. But that's the reason I bought that one. The pineapple tomato was fantastic. Now, because I don't like the taste of fresh tomatoes, it's hard for me to judge, but when I put it in bruschetta and when I put it in fresh salsa, that was absolutely amazing. And one thing that I really liked about the pineapple is that it produced really well in our heat. It continued to produce when some of the other ones stopped producing. And so this is one I feel like will be a good choice in my southern garden in the future. And then I have from Seed Savers Exchange, Eva's Purple Ball. And I bought this one because it's supposed to be more of a can't remember if it's more of a beefsteak, cherished for their flavor and, okay, perform well in humid areas. So that's why I bought this. It's always curious to me if something says it'll perform well in hot and humid areas. And I'm like, yeah, let's see. So I'm trying that out. Eva's Purple Ball was hands down my best slicing tomato I have ever grown. It's a beefsteak and it's supposed to perform well in humid areas. That's the reason I bought it, and it absolutely did. I got more production out of the Eva's Purple Ball than I've gotten out of any non-paste tomato ever, and it probably rivals some of the paste tomatoes, to be honest with you. I liked how it was the perfect size. It also held up well to transport, so I did share this with my friend who owns a cafe, and these tomatoes weren't all that soft and delicate. These actually had some firmness, but they weren't like your grocery store tomatoes that are hard and have no taste. I felt like these were absolutely perfect. So these are ones in the future that I will definitely include in my garden. The next one is Federally. This is again from Seed Savers Exchange. It's a 7-inch paste tomato, 85 days, and it's supposed to be good for salsa. And I like it because it's really long, and the long ones are good to go through my KitchenAid strainer. We'll see how it goes. I've heard good things about this one. Federally was kind of a disappointment. It ended up not performing all that well in my garden, especially considering how well all the other paste tomatoes did. Because I've heard good things about it, I may try it again sometime, but for now, it was not a winner in my garden. The next one is Hungarian Heart. And this is an 85-day indeterminate that these are supposed to be 1 pound tomatoes. And I'm replacing my Amish paste with this one this year because the Amish paste just tends to not do well in my heat at all. So let's try the Hungarian Heart. I did grow this as a first or second time gardener, and it did okay, but I grew it in ground bed soil that in hindsight wasn't good. And so I'm gonna try it again, knowing that my soil is a little bit better. The Hungarian Heart tomatoes were fantastic. They definitely produced these huge tomatoes, which were perfect for canning. I was able to get so much flesh out of these tomatoes to last a long time, whether I was doing salsa or sauce or anything like that. I think because it performed so well, especially in my hot and humid area, I think that I will probably continue to grow it instead of Amish paste in my garden. Okay, the next one is Opala, and I'm buying this one because when I did a YouTube video on paste tomatoes, or was it the one on tomatoes that perform well in heat? Maybe both. This one came up time and time again as one people really like to grow. So the reason I bought it is because it's supposed to be a 6-inch paste tomato. And like I said, I think it's supposed to do well in the heat. I'm not seeing it here, but we'll see. It's ideal processing tomato. Opala was another winner. It did really well in the heat. It continued to produce when we had some pretty significant heat spells, and the size was perfect. It was fantastic for canning. Very fleshy. I really liked Opala for canning, and it's definitely one that will continue to grow in my garden when I grow paste tomatoes. I'm gonna be trying Cherokee Purple. I have never grown Cherokee Purple, probably because I'm not a big fan of, or at all, of fresh eating tomatoes, but this one is one that just keeps getting brought up as an amazing tomato. So I'm gonna be growing that, and I'll be growing it partly. I think I'll be growing it, maybe one of them in my Wildflower Cafe garden and then one for me here on the patio. Cherokee Purple, it's been so famous, and I had to grow it for the first time this year. And it was a fun one to grow, but not the best one. I would say it was a fun one because who can't resist the color of the Cherokee Purple? It is absolutely beautiful once you cut it open, but it's one of those that you're gonna enjoy it the most if you pick it off the vine and then eat it pretty fast. I noticed that, at least in my climate, I'm not sure if it's like this for everyone, the shoulders had a tendency to not ripen. They would stay green. So I always had to cut off the top to be able to get to the tender flesh. I also found that it didn't keep very well. It's one of those that I either had to use it really fast or it was going to rot on me. So I would say it's a good specialty tomato, but understand that it does have some drawbacks. And that's one that I'm not sure I'll grow again in the garden. If I do, it may be just for, one plant so that I can have the color and the flavor to be able to add to some of the other tomatoes that I grow. Then an organic Brandy Wine. I don't think I've tried to grow a Brandy Wine in many years, so I'm gonna try that again. Brandy Wine performed really well. It's been many years since I grew Brandy Wine. In fact, I was probably a first-time gardener, so I don't really feel like I can judge a whole lot from that. But the Brandy Wine performed fantastic in my garden. It performed longer than some of the other slicing tomatoes did, and it was actually very tasty in bruschetta and in salsa. So that's one I think I'm gonna grow again. I've heard that it has a harder time in the heat, so it might be one I'll continue to test. It definitely didn't go as long as pineapple did, but it went longer than the Cherokee Purple did. So that's one I'll probably grow again in my garden. I'm trying several different black beans along with my Cherokee Trail of Tears beans, just to see if I can get some bush black beans to do a little bit better. Not better than the Trail of Tears, but just in general, because we eat a lot of black beans. So I'm trying this one. And I'm also trying a couple from High Mowing Seeds. I don't have that order in yet. I ordered them late. I'll share with you what those are. Black bean called Eclipse. So I'm gonna be comparing that to this one here. The black beans ended up doing really well. The Black Valentine grew in a ground bed and it did okay, but it didn't do great. It's possible because that ground bed wasn't as fertile or good of soil. The Eclipse I grew in a raised bed and it did really well. I had a lot of harvest out of those, and probably I have a couple of jars here of black beans, and I probably harvested more black beans this year than I ever have. Yeah, you can see I've got a couple of jars here and then a smaller jar of those beans. So I was really happy with that. I'm also gonna be trying a Quincy pinto bean from High Mowing as well. And then also a light red kidney bean from High Mowing. So I'm trying lots of different beans just to see if I can get something to perform in my climate in the cool summer, early summer into the heat. We'll just see. Now the pinto beans I was super pleased with. I've already started using these and cooking with these in my kitchen, but I'm really pleased with the amount that I got. I haven't gotten around to canning them yet, but overall I was really happy with these. I couldn't tell a huge difference between the Quincy pinto bean and the regular pinto bean. Both did great, and I will probably be growing these again in my garden. The red beans that I grew didn't perform all that great. I ended up getting about this much out of, I would say, maybe 40-foot row, so to speak. So one side was Hidatsa red, one side was light red kidney, and this is what I got. I'm not sure that I'll actually use it, or maybe I'll save it to try some other time, but it was a little bit of a disappointment. I grew it in my raised row, which the tomatoes did fantastic. I'm just not sure why these didn't do as well. It's possible that they could have gotten too much shade because they were beside my A-frame trellis on one side, and then of course the tomatoes were growing beside them. So that may have been the reason. So I might try them again in the future, but this was definitely the lowest of my dry bean harvest. Oh, and then also here, I forgot to mention this, I bought a yellow zucchini. I've never grown yellow zucchini before. This one's called Golden Glory from Johnny's. So we'll see how that does. That'll be fun. The Golden Glory zucchini did really well. I thought it was fun to be able to see the zucchini without it growing into a baseball bat without you realizing it. I didn't really notice a huge difference in flavor. To me, it just tasted like a regular zucchini, although when you cook it, everybody thinks it's squash. But I thought it was a fun one to grow. I may or may not grow it in the future, but I thought it was enjoyable to try. As you heard, many of these trials from last year, I'll be planting again this year. And of course, I'll be adding some new ones to the mix, as I always do. But I'd like to hear from you. What did you grow for the first time last year that worked well for you or didn't work well for you? As you remember me saying, one reason that I grew Opala tomatoes was because you guys suggested it to me. So I would love to hear what varieties work well for you and what you would suggest others try in their gardens as well. Comment below. I hope you've enjoyed this unconventional reflection of the seeds that I bought for the first time last year. And to continue with me on my garden journey this year, be sure and like and subscribe for more. And if you're a podcast listener, be sure to check out the Beginner's Garden podcast.